Chapter 18 of The Girls of Friendly Terrace by Harriet Loomis Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18 A Remarkable Evening. A wakeful, restless night is not the best of preparations for launching out in untried activities. The pale, tremulous Elaine, who presented herself at Mr. John Mannering's office the next morning, was far less equal to the ordeal of being sized up than she had been the previous day. A soldier on the eve of his first battle may have sensations very like those of Elaine as she seated herself at the desk and began her unfamiliar work. Time in a business office is a deliberate affair, Elaine soon discovered. It was no wonder that much was accomplished when the hours were 2 or 3 times as long as the easygoing hours with which she was best acquainted. At 10 o'clock she was impatient for luncheon. At 11 she wanted to go home. By noon she was ready for bed. The other girl in the office gave her information in more or less technical terms, which left Elaine little the wiser. It was incredible that she could ever master the meaning of the phrases Miss Newell rattled off so glibly. Each new item, as she gave it her attention, crowded out all that had gone before. She felt like a spent swimmer clutching desperately at slippery, water-soaked stalks to find each giving way in her hand. And when Miss Newell had finished, Elaine was gasping like a swimmer who has come to the surface after going under. The middle of the afternoon found her tired, bewildered, so near to complete disheartenment that it needed only a feather's weight addition to her load to let her to. As ill luck would have it, a trifling extra was forthcoming. About 3 o'clock, the office door swung ajar to admit a florid gentleman, accompanied by 2 young girls. Elaine, recalling Miss Newell's instructions, rose hastily and approached them. "Do you wish to see Mr. Manning?" she began, addressing the florid gentleman. Then all at once it flashed over her that something vaguely familiar in the faces of the 2 girls was not a misleading fancy, as she thought. She really knew them, for she had met them at Peggy Raymond's Halloween party. So strong had Elaine's feeling of forlornness become by now that even the appearance of these mere glances gave her pleasure out of all proportion to its excited cause. The color rose in her cheeks, and she said smilingly, "Why, good afternoon." "Good afternoon," said the girls in chorus, and returned her look blankly. It did not occur to her that her own tardy recognition should have given her the key for interpreting their unresponsive manner. The possibility that these acquaintances failed to recognize her, as she had come so near failing to recognize them, was far from her thoughts. She was being snubbed, taught her place. She would have to remember henceforth that a girl who worked in a real estate office must not expect cordial treatment from girls who, like the lilies of the field, toiled not, and yet outdid Solomon in gay apparel. Just what the florid man wanted, and whether he got it or not, Elaine was never exactly sure, for in the abyss of humiliation into which she had descended, connected thought was impossible. In her misery and confusion, she was conscious of but one thing, an overwhelming longing for the end of that dreadful day. Plenty of girls have gone home from just such experiences, to be cheered, soothed, encouraged, and sent out in the morning with teeth set and heart resolute. But the atmosphere of Elaine's home was not of the sort to revive the fainting and inspire the discouraged. Mrs. Marshall, as well as her daughter, had spent a wretched day, weeping at frequent intervals and bemoaning the changed fortunes which had brought her family to such straits. There was nothing in her companionship to invigorate the girl who crept home at nightfall, half crushed under a burden no less heavy because it was largely imaginary. Elaine's evident dejection plunged Mrs. Marshall still deeper into melancholy, and the mother's low spirits reacted on the girl. Instead of the mutual helpfulness which should have been given, each was making it harder for the other. When Peggy Raymond made her appearance at 8 o'clock, Elaine was lying back in the easy chair, her eyes closed and her face colorless. Mrs. Marshall, sitting on the other side of the round table, had the air of one who has expected the worst all along, and whose sole remaining comfort is the doubtful joy of saying, "I told you so." "Headache?" exclaimed Peggy sympathetically, yet cheerily too, for Peggy had an intuitive shrinking from the sympathy which knocks the props out from under a tottering courage. "Well, the first day of anything's always a hard day. Want me to rub your head?" "No, as if it were too much trouble to refuse, than as if she welcomed the thought of Peggy's ministrations. Indeed, she was almost in the mood to resent the idea of being made comfortable, but Peggy slipped behind her chair, stroking the throbbing temples with a touch at once gentle and assuring. Uncle John telephoned me this evening, she observed. He says you take things a little hard, but that you'll be all right as soon as you're used to it. Mrs. Marshall sighed heavily, and Elaine came to life sufficiently to say with some spirit, "There are some things one never would get used to." Peggy's caressing hand halted. "Some things? What sort of things do you mean?" "Like being snubbed, for instance." "Snubbed?" cried Peggy, startled. "Of course, it's no more than I should have expected. When I took up that work, I ought to have known that people would look down on me and treat me accordingly. But somehow I wasn't prepared for it." "Look here, Elaine," said Peggy, thoroughly aroused. "Business is business, and when a girl goes into an office, she must expect that she'll be told of her mistakes. But to imagine that Uncle John is going to look down on anybody—" "Oh," Elaine's tone was apologetic, as she interrupted. "It wasn't your uncle. He was very kind indeed, all that I saw of him, but along in the afternoon—" To her amazement, she was obliged to pause to get control of her voice. "Two girls came in, girls I met at your house," she faltered. "Their name is Henderson." "Bess and Lou? Well, what of it?" "Why, I spoke to them before I thought, just as I would anywhere. Everything seemed so strange that I had a silly feeling as if it were awfully nice to see anybody I knew. And oh, Peggy." Elaine broke down and sobbed helplessly. "They were so cold and distant, and all at once I realized how they must feel to have a girl in an office acting as if she thought she was as good as they were. I suppose I deserved to be snubbed." "If I had been listened to," observed Mrs. Marshall tragically, "this could not have happened." "Why, I never heard of such a thing," Peggy cried, finding her voice. "Lou and Bessie are nice, sensible girls as far as I know. I can't imagine they're doing anything so ill-bred and silly as snubbing you for speaking to them. I simply can't believe it." "It's true, though." Elaine wiped away her tears, and Peggy took a long look at her. "Well, what of it?" she said. Elaine hesitated. "You mean—" "I mean it's not worth a second thought. If they didn't intend anything, there's no sense in worrying, and if they did, they're beneath your notice." "But Peggy!" Elaine expostulated. "Don't you see it can't go on with this if people are going to look down on me and despise me? I don't mind how hard I work, but this—" Something in Peggy's look halted her midway in sentence. The other girl's eyes were ablaze. "Elaine, see here. Why did you apply for that position in the first place?" "Why, I needed the money, Peggy." "You didn't do it on the spur of the moment, did you? You thought about it and made up your mind that it was the right thing to do." "Why, yes." Elaine hesitated, feeling a little suspicious that she was walking into a trap. "You're the same Elaine tonight that you were yesterday, aren't you? You haven't been spoiled by spending the day in Uncle John's office. Is there any reason why anybody should like you less or respect you less?" "Of course not, Peggy. It's only the way people feel about such things." Peggy did not mean to stop till she had spoken her mind. "You're ready to give up doing something you're sure is right and sensible because of what people think. You know they're wrong. You know such prejudices are silly and mistaken, and yet you haven't got the courage to fight them. I don't know who would be brave enough for that," Elaine said dejectedly. "Everybody ought to be brave enough. I think of the people in the world who conquered real obstacles. People like Helen Keller, for instance. It's a shame for such a girl as you to give in to a lie, to let herself be beaten by something she despises. You're in the right, and you know it. Hold your head up and let people think what they please." Peggy's exhortation broke off abruptly on the discovery that there was a fourth person in the room. A tall girl stood behind her, looking down upon her with a face oddly like Elaine's, though something, not years alone, had given it a rather pathetic maturity. She was pale, and the shadows under her eyes made them seem unnaturally large. As she met Peggy's startled gaze, a little smile fluttered across her lips, and then, as if unaccustomed to those surroundings, was lost in instant gravity. "I've been listening to you, Peggy Raymond," she said, in a voice which Peggy instantly recognized as one she had heard before, and that over the telephone. and I think the cap fits me." Peggy sprang to her feet. Even in her excitement, she was on her guard against betraying the secret of Elaine's confidence. Fortunately, her confusion over Grace's unexpected appearance and contribution to the conversation was sufficient for the exigencies of the case. No one could have guessed from her manner that she had a previous knowledge of Grace's presence in the house. "Sit down, Peggy Raymond." The older girl touched Peggy's shoulder lightly and seated herself nearby. A furtive glance told Peggy that Mrs. Marshall's face was colorless and that Elaine was sitting bolt upright in her chair, her eyes protruding as if her sister had been a chance visitor from another planet. Apparently Grace was not impressed by the excitement due to her unheralded appearance. "I am Grace Marshall," she said, addressing Peggy, "Elaine's sister. I couldn't help knowing that you were Elaine's sister after really looking at you," Peggy replied, trying to smile naturally. Grace reflected a minute, apparently studying the pattern of the carpet. "So you don't believe in giving in to a lie?" "No," Peggy gulped, "I don't. And if you're in the right, you should hold your head up and let people think what they please. Isn't that what you said?" "It's what I believe in with all my heart." "I don't think you're right. And do you know, I've been acting on a very different plan. I'm going to tell you something that happened not so very long ago and see what you have to say about that." It was the story Peggy had heard before, shorn of some of its tragedy, compressed into as few words as possible, a bald tale if the burning eyes of the narrator had not supplied the weakness. She sat with crossed hands as she told it, and when she had finished, looked expectantly in Peggy's direction. "Well," she said, as the other hesitated. "Well," cried Peggy, voicing the sentiment she had expressed earlier, "somebody ought to hide, but not you. Then you think it's been said?" "Yes!" Peggy's smile took the edge off her glance. "You could be braver." "Well, I've been brave enough to come down and see you." Grace laughed out. Peggy noticed that both Elaine and her mother started nervously at the sound. "You mustn't think me familiar on short acquaintance. You see, I've known you for some time, and the most popular topic of conversation in this house since we moved in has been Peggy Raymond. You don't mind my calling you Peggy?" "I'd mind dreadfully if you called me anything else. And by the way," Peggy had some sensible ideas as to striking when the iron is hot, "mayn't I bring some of the girls in to see you? They will be so interested when they know Elaine's sister has come." Grace's gesture reminded Peggy of one who, coming from the darkness of a cellar, blinks and shrinks away from the sunlight. "Not yet, not quite yet," she pleaded. "Let me get a little used to things first." And Peggy wisely forbore to press her, guessing that as soon as Grace began to live normally, her unnatural shrinking from companionship would disappear. It was an exciting evening. Peggy stayed till her mother telephoned to ask if anything was the matter. When some reference was made to Elaine's headache, Elaine protested. "Headache? I haven't any headache. I never felt better in my life." Peggy viewed her with approval. It was not only that Elaine's color had returned and her languid eyes had brightened. There was another change, indefinable, but not to be mistaken. When courage and resolution come flooding back into a heart deprived of both, the least observing cannot fail to note the difference. "Going to the office tomorrow?" Peggy demanded as she rose to go. "Of course. And you're not going to say silly things anymore, are you, about people who look down on you?" "I'm not going to be beaten by my sister. Grace needn't think she's got a monopoly in the courage of the family." Elaine slipped her arm about Grace's shoulders, her face so transformed by tenderness and pride that it was hardly recognizable. Grace looked rueful over the implied compliment. "I'm afraid neither of us could be called heroines, but Peggy started us right, and we'll have to help each other to be brave." It certainly was a remarkable evening. But the thing which astonished Peggy even more than the dramatic appearance of Elaine's mysterious sister was the fact that Mrs. Marshall kissed her goodnight. End of chapter 18. Chapter 18 of The Girls of Friendly Terrace by Harriet L. Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18. A Remarkable Evening. A wakeful, restless night is not the best of preparations for launching out in untried activity. activities. The pale, tremulous Elaine, who presented herself at Mr. John Mannering's office the next morning, was far less equal to the ordeal of being sized up than she had been the previous day. A soldier on the eve of his first battle may have sensations very like those of Elaine as she seated herself at the desk, feeling unfamiliar work. Time in a business office is a deliberate affair, Elaine soon discovered. It was no wonder that much was accomplished when the hours were 2 or 3 times as long as the easygoing hours with which she was best acquainted. At 10 o'clock she was impatient for luncheon. At 11 she wanted to go home. By noon she was ready for bed. The other girl in the office gave her information in more or less technical terms, which left Elaine little the wiser. It was incredible that she could ever master the meaning of the phrases Miss Newell rattled off so glibly. Each new item, as she gave it her attention, crowded out all that had gone before. She felt like a spent swimmer, clutching desperately at slippery, water-soaked stalks, to find each giving way in her hand. And when Miss Newell had finished, Elaine was gasping, like a swimmer who has come to the surface after going under. The middle of the afternoon found her tired, bewildered, and so near to complete disheartenment that it needed only a feather's weight addition to her load to wreck her weakened courage. As ill luck would have it, that trifling extra was forthcoming. About 3 o'clock the office door swung ajar to admit a florid gentleman, accompanied by 2 young girls. Elaine, recalling Miss Newell's instructions, rose hastily and approached them. "Do you wish to see Mr. Manning?" she began, addressing the florid gentleman. Then all at once it flashed over her that something vaguely familiar in the faces of the 2 girls was not a misleading fancy, as she had thought. She really knew them, for she had met them at Peggy Raymond's Halloween party. So strong had Elaine's feeling of forlornness become by now that even the appearance of these mere acquaintances gave her pleasure out of all proportion to its exciting cause. The color rose in her cheeks as she said smilingly, "Why, good afternoon." "Good afternoon," said the girls in chorus, and returned her look blankly. It did not occur to her that her own tardy recognition should have given her the key for interpreting their unresponsive manner. The possibility that these acquaintances failed to recognize her, as she had come so near failing to recognize them, was far from her thoughts. She was being snubbed off her place. She would have to remember henceforth that a girl who worked in a real estate office must not expect cordial treatment from girls who, like the lilies of the field, toiled not, and yet outdid Solomon in gay apparel. Just what the florid man wanted, and whether he got it or not, Elaine was never exactly sure. For in the abyss of humiliation into which she had descended, connected thought was impossible. In her misery and confusion, she was conscious of but one thing, an overwhelming longing for the end of that dreaded day. Plenty of girls had gone home from just such experiences, to be cheered, soothed, encouraged, and sent out in the morning, deep scent and heart resolute. But the atmosphere of Elaine's home was not of the sort to revive the fainting and inspire the discouraged. Mrs. Marshall, as well as her daughter, had spent a wretched day, weeping at frequent intervals, and bemoaning the changed fortunes which had brought her family to such straits. There was nothing in her companionship to invigorate the girl who crept home at nightfall, half crushed under a burden no less heavy because it was largely imaginary. Elaine's evident dejection plunged Mrs. Marshall still deeper into melancholy, and the mother's low spirits reacted on the girl. Instead of the mutual helpfulness which should have been given, each was making it harder for the other. When Peggy Raymond made her appearance at 8 o'clock, Elaine was lying back in the easy chair, her eyes closed and her face colorless. Mrs. Marshall, sitting on the other side of the round table, had the air of one who has expected the worst all along, and whose sole remaining comfort is the doubtful joy of saying, "I told you so." "Headache?" exclaimed Peggy sympathetically, yet cheerily too, for Peggy had an intuitive shrinking from the sympathy which knocks the props out from under a tottering courage.